Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and as of today or tomorrow, there should be another build for Shadowlands Alpha. And this one hopefully will have some changes for Shadow Priest, but I'm also hoping it'll have changes for other classes. I'm a huge fan of playing a variety of different classes and specs. Usually I lean towards specs that are generally not considered super viable in specific matters, like enhancement shamans when they weren't that good, or survival hunters within PvE content, and other things like that. I love being able to experience different playstyles and changes to playstyles, and every time Blizzard updates playstyles for the better, I'm a huge fan because, well, I want to be the first one to check out some of these different builds, some of these new updates and changes. I like the diversity we have with all the different classes and so many different playstyles for us all to choose from. So that's what I've really been focused on in Shadowlands. Because I'm such a class enthusiast, I wanted to make a video showcasing you guys 5 classes that I'm super excited about when it comes to the alpha so far. Before we go on though, let me preface this video. Just because you don't see a class that maybe you play doesn't mean that it's inherently bad. I really want to highlight classes that I'm super excited about from playing them, and Blizzard hasn't tackled every class change available so far. So the classes I'll be talking about are not particularly classes that are top damage, even though I'm mostly someone who is a DPS player and I am looking at most classes from a DPS perspective. I'm not picking them because of top damage. Hell, some of these classes are actually super low in damage, but the playstyle and the changes and iterations that Blizzard has been throwing at them does give me hope for these particular classes as I'm talking about them right now. The first class on this list is going to be a Warlock. I'm a huge fan of the things that Blizzard has done with them so far. With Warlocks, Blizzard decided to tackle Affliction as the very first spec for them to check out and reiterate on. Affliction is a spec that a variety of PvPers have been favoritive of because, well, dot damage has always been super fun to play with. Being able to rot down the whole enemy team or just a couple of enemies inside of Arena has always been part of the fun gameplay, and something about that gameplay in Battle for Azeroth was completely lost. The spec itself started to feel a little bit awkward even in dungeons and raid content, where for whatever reason it had some of the best bursts. Honestly, a class that's all about damage over time I feel like should never be bursty. At most it should be a class with strong sustained damage, but never all about big explosive potential damage. Or at least it never made sense in my head why it would be. Blizzard decided to refocus Affliction, and from what I've been able to see in terms of testing, the damage numbers are lining up pretty well. It isn't super important for us in the alpha to take a look at the balancing and tuning numbers, because Blizzard is going to change how classes are tuned as the alpha goes into beta and towards release. There's going to be plenty of tuning to look forward to. The things where we're looking at the damage breakdowns is kind of take a look at playstyles. Do certain abilities and the order in which you use them, do those feel good to use? Do those buttons feel fun to press? And is there some sort of inherent reward for pressing them in the core, in the combination that you did press them? In terms of Affliction, being able to put up dots on everybody. Does that dot heavy playstyle feel good? Does it feel satisfying? Yes. Does the damage reflect the satisfactory feel? Yes or no? And particularly, what is the percentage of damage that is going to be from your filler abilities to dot damage abilities? That's going to be another aspect that is definitely super important to pay attention to. Right now, I feel like Blizzard is doing a good job with Affliction. They're still iterating Affliction pretty regularly. I'm a huge fan of what they've done so far, and I cannot wait to see what it looks like towards the end of its cycle. But the other two specs that I was surprised about is Destruction and Demonology. Destruction is still a little rough. They're basically keeping it mostly the same, but they are adjusting certain talents in order to give you a little bit more playstyle options, and they are trying to kind of figure out what do they want to do with the whole Chaos Bolt spamming and summoning Inferno's playstyle. But at least Blizzard is reiterating on the spec and they're not leaving it exactly as it is. So maybe some sort of complexity could be added back into the spec rather than just chucking out Chaos Bolts every few seconds. With Demonology is where I was super excited about. So Affliction and Demonology are the two specs that really get me excited about Warlock. Being able to summon pets and find new ways for your tyrants and other pets to interact with one another, where your tyrant doesn't consume your imps anymore, but rather consumes a portion of all demons' health, allowing you far greater variety and diversity of different talent builds that you might be able to play into, and different pets that you can summon, and the different ways that you can play with your soul shards in terms of planning your massive demon invasion army. So it's super enjoyable to be able to play around with these different playstyles. And Blizzard tuning some of the numbers, it does feel that certain abilities are finally a lot more impactful. But that's just 2 specs that I'm talking about out of the 3 that are really super enjoyed. And I think the Blizzard is trying to reiterate and really starting to get this right. The feel and the fantasy behind those 2 out of the 3 specs. Even Destruction, still decent spec, it just doesn't have super crazy complexity in its playstyle, at least at the moment of making this video. I would say that they have done a very good job so far, and I cannot wait to see what they're going to do in the future. Another thing that I really like is the general Warlock gameplay and how curses play into it. It seems that Blizzard is allowing you to curse literally everything. From raid bosses to ads to players, literally everything is going to be sitting under curses. And as a Warlock, you actually bring a legitimately strong value to debuffing your enemies. Have you ever played other MMOs or other fantasy games where there were certain classes that are about damage, tank, and healing, but then there were classes to buff allies, and that was the whole idea, is they're playing a support build. And then there was classes to debuff enemies. You did a bit of damage, but mostly you would debuff enemies. World of Warcraft is really allowing Warlocks to go ham with the debuff aspect. Being able to debuff the boss with either curse to make him cast slower or auto attack slower on your tank is actually quite enjoyable. Being able to debuff the whole enemy team to help control and help your tank survive certain mechanics is also quite enjoyable as well. I actually did not know how much I would enjoy curses. It does allow a Warlock to not only be engaged in the damage aspect of the game, but also micromanaging enemies and debuffing them to make the experience for your party easier within that piece of content. I'm actually very surprised just how much I enjoyed the curse mechanic, but also combined with some of the other class changes, I'm very much looking forward to what Warlocks will feel like and look like towards the release of Shadowlands itself. Another class that I'm greatly excited for is the Warrior. Maybe not from the tanking perspective, because Protection Warriors are still on shaky ground, but Fury and Arms. It seems that Blizzard, with some of the recent updates, really decided to spruce up Fury and Arms, continuing to iterate on them a little bit more. With Arms losing that whole bleed playstyle, but rather keeping the bleed as a debuff in order to amp up your damage is going to be quite awesome. I'm a huge fan because I feel like the bleed gameplay was cool, but you're not a feral to it, right? You should be an Arms Warrior slashing and crushing your enemy, whether you're wielding a powerful axe to cut your foes in half or a mighty mace to crush enemies beneath your feet. This change is pretty cool, but the coolest one that I know you guys are excited about is the Fury Warrior changes. Being able to once again wield one-handers and two-handers will create so much more diversity in gameplay depending on which weapons you might have farmed in dungeons or raids, and is going to create interesting different playstyles, as I'm pretty sure Blizzard is going to have interesting items for us to play with. I mean, they've added very interesting weapons for rogues and demon hunters and a variety of other classes. We can all think of some of the corruption gear from Neolotha, or like the Croc Tusk from the Underrot. Pretty sure every agility class is a huge fan of the Croc Tusk. So something like this being added into the game will allow Fury Warriors to have completely varied builds. Some of the changes with some of the talents as well available for Fury Warriors can also dictate interesting different playstyles. And the fact that Blizzard is continuing to iterate on them with kind of how they decided to completely redo the talent bar for Fury Warriors, and now they're trying to figure out what abilities are good, what abilities are not. Let's give them something new to test. Do you like these talents? Do you not like them? Tell us what you want. And might mean that the next update and the next update will be even more and more and more iteration. I didn't even think that Fury Warrior, as it is in BFA, has been all that bad. And I'm surprised that they actually decided to do this much work on Fury Warrior in this new expansion. But I'm glad they did, because the changes that we've been able to play with so far have been very enjoyable to mess around with. I'm a huge fan of so far what Blizzard has been able to bring into the alpha with the Warrior. On top of the flavor stuff that they're adding for Arms and Fury, what are some of the other things the Warriors are getting that I like? Intervene. It's another ability to charge to an ally. Normally it's a tank ability where you can charge to an enemy or an ally, but having charges and intervenes will give warriors that much needed mobility. That's never a bad thing. I think there can never be enough mobility for any class. Another thing I enjoy for warrior is finally you're able to use your rage defensively. It is going to be different depending if you're Arms or Fury, as the cost is going to be widely different, but finally you can use that rage not only to crush your enemies, but now to pop a defensive, ignore pain, a tank defensive that I think actually kind of fits for both Fury and Arms Warrior playstyle. You put up a shield, ignoring a portion of the pain, 50% of the damage to a certain point is going to be set into this absorb shield. and it does cost your rage, which is where sometimes you'll have to make a choice whether you want to do damage or pop a defensive, a more meaningful approach to different situations. And finally, warriors have something to do besides just pop a defensive, which I think is going to be quite nice. And then of course, Spell Reflect, an ability that has been very much used in PvP, can finally start being used in PvE. There are certain mechanics right now in dungeons and even raids where you could use Spell Reflect as a warrior, and my god, would it feel so good. I know tanks get to use it quite often, but the fact that DPS can also use that as well, I think it will give them a little bit extra defensiveness, but also another fun mechanic to mess around with. Huge fan of the things they've done for the warrior. And then we have the Shaman. You knew that this class was going to be on this list. First of all, I'm not much of a healer, so I will say little about Restoration Shaman, but the fact that they can finally drop, again, a totem that provides mana for their allies, I think that's going to be quite useful. Because right now Restoration Shamans aren't really brought inside of raid except for all the utilities that totems bring, but having that one key ability that might get you a raid spot, providing mana for all the other healers, I think it's going to just make them so much more competitive. Besides that, elemental enhancement are all looking quite good. Let's get over to elemental really quickly because this spec isn't getting too changed. They are trying to standardize the playstyle a little bit instead of taking away a lot of the RNG and taking out a lot of that power from the final blast of your Earth Shock, which was fun in Battle for Azeroth, being able to line up a massive, big, global bursting ability. But I do think that more sustained, heavy playstyle for enhancement just fit. I feel like it always, even right now, kind of plays to more of a sustainy playstyle with all the different traits and essences combined. But it's not about building and spending, but rather doing constant damage to the enemy over time. It feels like a better playstyle for me, and playing it on the alpha, I think it fits them quite well. I think we might see more Elemental Shaman updates happening, primarily from the talent section, but I think the general base loop of Elemental where they are at, I think it just reflects to the playstyle that we're currently playing BFA that people kind of naturally gravitate towards to with the gear. And then of course we have Enhancement, which is getting updates from a whole Builder Spender Maelstrom playstyle to now more about managing your cooldowns and using abilities on a higher priority first, using abilities on lower priority after. A playstyle that has existed in older expansions, and a playstyle that a variety of people that played Shaman from back in the day know and are familiar with. It's a playstyle that worked, so it perfectly makes sense to go back to something like that, while also keeping certain interesting and new and fun abilities that recent expansions have brought, and trying to incorporate them into the old school playstyle. Enhancement Shaman damage right now in the alpha is still quite low, even with all the recent changes, but it feels so good to play. And I think this is just one of those things that you really need to play the spec in order to experience it. As someone who has a Shaman right now in BFA, and no, don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of being able to slam my head on Storm Strike all day and night, but I do like this moment-to-moment change of, hey, what's a more important ability? Which should I prioritize? Depending on the situation, depending on the procs. I do like the whole thought process that goes into when deciding your abilities as enhancement right now in Shadowlands. But what's also interesting for Enhancement Shaman is you're probably going to want at least one of them, especially if your raid or dungeon has a melee heavy roster. I think Blizzard is aware that you can't always balance and fine-tune every single class, depending on the content, depending on the tier, depending on the variety of different bonuses and scaling of each class. Sometimes certain classes are stronger than others. But Enhancement Shamans will also come with a totem, one Fury totem that will allow them to buff their other melee allies for a chance at an extra swing. Melee attacks are quite huge, and like a Demon Hunter buff or a Monk buff, now Enhancement Shamans bring a unique buff that only, not the class, but the spec has, which is super interesting. If you want to play Enhancement Shaman, and let's say your guild is going to have a variety of melee, from rogues to warriors, demon hunters, monks, you name it, of course they will want at least one enhancement for that extra value of physical auto attack damage. I mean, if you have this many melees in your group, you might as well. Which is definitely an interesting approach. So you have Elemental with a very simple but direct playstyle, but then you have Restoration with not a lot of changes, and Enhancement with a variety of interesting changes that don't really reflect good damage, at least right now in the alpha, probably gonna change in the future. But then Enhancement and Restoration both bring a totem unique to their spec that provides group utility. A very interesting way to maybe solve some of the issue of being able to, or having a hard time balancing classes and balancing certain aspects in the future of the next expansion. Now, this wouldn't be a Dalaran video without me propping up rogues, but to be honest, they really are in a good spot. Rogues are looking exceptionally strong in the next expansion of Shadowlands. Whether you're Subtlety, Assassination, or Outlaw, all of them are looking actually quite good. The return of few abilities like Slice and Dice, for example, has been quite enjoyable for most of the specs. For Subtlety, this gives you an extra ability to manage, and Subtlety has always been a spec that's all about preparation, so given extra abilities besides just Nightblade and Eviscerate is always welcome. Plus, the things you can do with Slice and Dice that actually gives you extra energy generation because of extra fast attack speeds. There's a passive where every time you auto-attack an enemy, you can generate energy in a common point, but usually that chance is kind of low-ish because your auto-attack chance is as fast as your daggers, but Slice and Dice speeds it up, which speeds up your energy regen, speeds up the common points, and overall speeds up the pace of the game. For Outlaw, that gives you Slice and Dice and Roll the Bones to manage, so you never really have one buff. As Outlaw, normally you would re-roll your common points for a buff, and if you have one bad buff, you would normally roll out of it. With Slice and Dice and buff mechanic being together, it's almost as if you have 2 buffs every time you roll. Or if you get lucky, 3 buffs. Or if you get really lucky, 6 buffs. It creates a little bit more consistency to a spec that's mired in RNG, so a lot more people might find it palpable. Poisons are also coming back. You have instant poison, which will do extra nature damage, big whoop. But then you have crippling poison for a direct slow. Then you also have numbing poison, which can reduce enemies' attack speed and I believe also cast speed. So kind of like a 2-in-1, a Warlock mechanic with a slow as well as a attack speed reduction, cast speed reduction, but only for a singular target, unless you're Assassination who likes spreading it. Plus all the other class changes available, with Find Weakness being more of a central mechanic for Subtlety, where your Shadowlands is now direct damage increase no matter how you put it in terms of your talents, still giving you the variety but also enabling the core of the playstyle to be more focused. Then you have Outlaw, which again still has the Roll the Bones mechanic, but now has kind of like a Colossus Smash. Think of it as like a Blood of the Enemy but for single target, attached to your between the eyes. You get Kidney Shot back, so you no longer will have the stun capability to stun the world every few seconds, but now it'll have a more determined Colossus Smash type of mechanic where, hey, this is the moment for you to do the most amount of damage, go ahead and do it. And then Assassination is still same Assassination. That spec didn't really change too much. There is a bit of concern right now about Slice and Dice and Assassination feeling like maybe too much of a bloat of abilities to manage between your Ruptures, your Corrodes, and now Slice and Dice, and sometimes feeling like it's now creating a little bit more of a ramp up for the spec that people are or were not used to for a few expansions. But Blizzard is still iterating on stuff, but Assassination is still mostly the same spec as you remember, which has worked really well and has been a crowd favorite. It's also enjoyable to see whenever playing Subtlety, Assassination, and Outlaw, playing to your strengths and then seeing the damage that reflects it. Again, we are able to do logs and log some of our fights to see what the damage is like. Again, we're not looking for a class that does the most amount of damage, but other classes that feel enjoyable, and if there is this feedback loop of, hey, if I'm playing it properly, then I'm getting the numbers I should be getting, and Rogue definitely has this early on in the alpha. I think Rogue is a class that Blizzard has done one update for at the very beginning, and they're still iterating smaller updates here and there, but for the most part they haven't changed much, because the way that they changed it originally at the beginning of Shadowlands fits so well they haven't had a need to address it just yet. The least amount of effort has been put into rogues, but the changes they've done have been actually good, and they've been positive in every way. Not every spec is perfect, and Rogue has some things that need to be cleaned up as well as every other spec in the game. But I do think that they've had a really good head start, and Blizzard hasn't really had a need to rework them completely. But so far, so good. Finally, we have Death Knight. It was hard to put 5th class on this list. There's a couple different classes I'm super excited about, but I gotta give Death Knights really a fair shake. They are looking quite good. Whether you're Frost, whether you're Unholy, I think both specs of DPS for Death Knights are going to be good. As for Blood, I'm not really a Blood DK. I do want to make a video series on some of the tanks on the alpha so far and take a look at them in terms of what seems to be strong, what doesn't seem to be all that good from my personal experience. But when it comes to talking about Frost and Unholy, I've been paying attention super closely. And I feel like while they are not finalized or finished or perfect just yet, they are definitely in quite a good spot. Unholy Death Knight Mastery change, where now not only does it increase your shadow damage, but also increases the pet damage, I feel like finalizes the spec. A lot of people found the zombie or the Army of the Dead playstyle super strong, where you summon in Mages of the Dead, and Blizzard just reincorporated it back into the spec directly, which I think was a good move from the start. It allows you to continue on the iteration of where the Unholy Death Knight is at in BFA, finalizing it, kind of like how Elemental Shamans have been gravitating towards more of a steady playstyle, and Blizzard was able to finalize and lock that in. They're able to finalize and lock in the playstyle the Death Knights have on BFA into Shadowlands, and kind of explore it further and continue from there. As for the regular rotation, Unholy Death Knights didn't really change too much. There's going to be some nuances of when you summon your gargoyle, when you transform your pets, when do you drop down the army, and maybe certain choices of gear, how much haste you're going to need for all those resources to get your army back up and running in full swing. But the general playstyle that it had back in Legion of putting dots on enemies, putting debuffs on enemies, beefing up your pets, that still stays the same. But the little nuances are going to be fun and different to play around with, especially if you never played Death Knight before. Frost Death Knights have yet to gain any kind of buff for wielding a two-hand weapon. So right now, dual wield playstyle is going to be the strongest because of 2 runes versus 1 rune with a two-hander. However, with Fury Warriors gaining single Mighty Fury, we still have hope, boys. So I wouldn't give up on Frost DK just yet. Frost Death Knight so far also have had really good changes. It's not really Blizzard changing the playstyle. You're still going to be Frost Striking and Obliterating in a similar fashion that you have been so far. However, the damage output from those Frost Strikes and Obliterate is going to allow you more talents to pick from. A lot of players started with the Breath build. Blizzard really wanted for people to play the Breathless Intergosa build, but not everybody enjoyed it. So eventually, when there was a moment where people could pounce on and play the Machine Gun build, as some of them called it, which is all about spamming Obliterates and big crits and getting cooldown reduction, people jumped on it as soon as they could. So it seems that Blizzard made some changes to the Frost Death Knight to freely allow you to play the Machine Gun playstyle if that's so you wish. So the playstyles for Unholy and Frost are super good, but Death Knights are also getting extra utilities that will make him even stronger. One of them being a raid utility. Sometimes in dungeon content, Death Knights are a bit of a hit and a miss. They have grip, they have AMS, they have IBF, they're generally tanky, they have a lot of health, they're not really mobile. They have a range kick, and that's really about the toolkits that you're bringing into group content. But right now, you also have on Shadowlands Alpha, Anti-Magic Zone. It's going to be a massive defensive to bring into your group that effectively deals with magic damage in an area. This is huge. For a class that sometimes is good, sometimes is not, adding that extra raid utility will mean that that class is always going to be wanted in groups. We don't know yet if Blood Death Knights, Frost Death Knights, or Holy Death Knights will be the strongest pick. However, if you're someone who's looking at a Death Knight, yeah, this should be definitely something worth looking into. The fact that you bring something new and unique to the table that no other class does. This also combined with the fact that you're getting so many more runes to play with in your weapons. I mean, if you want a diversity and variety, that's something extra that Blizzard is adding to the table. We're not saying any of these runes are going to be good, but the potential for them is definitely there, and that's what I'm more excited about. Plus, at Shadowlands, it definitely sounds like a Death Knight expansion, so I think we'll see more updates to Death Knights before all this is over. It's going to take a little bit of time, but I'm pretty sure we're going to see far more updates than we've seen before. I want to thank you guys so much for checking out this video. There are a lot of classes that I'm taking a look at regularly on the Shadowlands Alpha. There are a variety of different builds and variety of different playstyles that I'm constantly experimenting with. But in this video, I just wanted to highlight some of the classes that I'm super extra excited about, and just wanted to give you guys a bit of an insight how they are looking like on the alpha. Just because your class wasn't made into this video doesn't mean it's awful and terrible. There's a variety of classes that I enjoy and a seldom few that I actually do not like. This video is mostly to highlight some of the progress that Blizzard has done that I've enjoyed and agreed with. There are certain specs and classes that are still a work in progress, and certain few that really need a fix or two. But I want to highlight the ones that I'm very hopeful about. Definitely these are the classes that I will be alting and or maining in the next expansion. Before you ask, yes, I am going to still main rogue. I don't think I'm going to be swapping out a different class, and the reason as to why is, well, I like Outlaw, and I like the stuff they've done for Outlaw so far. Huge fan of the Outlaw playstyle and the changes that we are getting. But I've never been the kind of person to always play one spec and just stick to it the whole time. Eventually I do want to explore the different playstyles and boundaries, and definitely want to check out all the classes listed in this video. But thank you guys so much for checking this video out. Let me know your thoughts in the comments about classes that I talked about in this video, and what would be your top 5 classes that you're really excited about for the next expansion. Thank you guys so much for watching. I very much hope you enjoyed, and I'll see all of you in another video.